Hello, my name is Dr. Amber Hughes. This is the sixth episode of this career counseling series. In this episode, I'm going to talk about career counseling diverse populations. I've talked significantly of including culture and diversity into career counseling up to this point. I did it for a couple of reasons. First, I wanted to set the stage for why we should be using postmodern career theories in practice. Second, being able to work with diverse populations is part of our ethical code as counselors and is a large part of counselor education in general. However, up until now, I have been talking about the theories and identifying how culture plays a role in each theory. Now I want to spend some time talking about diversity and about how we can do multicultural career counseling in practice. I want to start by reminding you of the why of considering the role of culture on career. First, let's consider the role of culture in traditional theories. The first theories I want to talk about are, again, the traditional ones. And remember, those ones are like trait and factor theories, Holland's interest inventories, and Super's developmental theory. Those theories assume that people have a choice in their work and assume that people follow a linear trajectory in their careers. That means that they're going from a major in college or training. Let's say they go to school to be a teacher and then they get a job as a teacher. Let's say they decide after college or after high school that they want to do an apprenticeship as a welder, and then they go on to work as a welder. Okay? A lot of people do that. However, some people don't. Actually, most people end up not following that linear trajectory. This also means that again, we're assuming people have a choice. Some people can't be just what they want to be, and most people don't even graduate from high school, not let alone go to college or get a job consistent with their degree and so on. And so when we're working with people like that and we talk about careers, a lot of times they'll say, hey, I don't have a career, I have a job. Okay? And so we want to make sure that we're choosing a theory that allows us to work with people who don't feel like they have a career. Trait and factor theory and Holland's theories in particular base their career categories on interests that are gendered and based on white middle-class populations for individuals with specific ability levels. What does this mean? For example, Holland's realistic category is based on many male-specific jobs and thus stereotypical male traits. It's also heavy in careers that require a certain level of training and education and is not usable with individuals of certain cognitive ability levels. We also, and when I say gendered, we also need to consider that gender is more than being just male or female. You know, we like these categories and we like to put people into places, but it's really more complex than that. There's a lot of people who are in between. There's a lot of people who don't fit firmly into the masculine categories or into the feminine categories. And so we need to acknowledge that that matters whenever we're using assessments like this that do depend on those gendered roles and those gendered stereotypes, okay? Now, these theories have been used and researched with multiple populations. What that means is that in the world of especially in the world of diversity, is that what we're doing is we're taking a certain perspective, the perspective of Holland, and we are applying it to other populations and saying, hey, yeah, it works with them. It doesn't, however, it didn't consider other perspectives in the development of it, okay? So that means that while it may work just fine with different populations, it may not be capturing everything that we want to capture whenever we're using this with diverse populations, if that makes sense. So basically, we're taking something that we've created and we're saying, here, use this and let's see if it works. And then we're getting the results we want. And we're like, hey, yeah, this works just fine. But we're still coming at it from the perspective of the person who created it. And we're not taking the time to say, hey, what do you think about career? Maybe there's more to it than that, if that makes any sense. Keep in mind, though, that you can still use these, right? I've been saying that all along. You can use Holland's codes. You may just need to revise it to make it appropriate for your population. My old professor at the University of Tennessee works with individuals with disabilities. What she did was she created this program for individuals who did not have the cognitive ability to go to college, but they were able to work, right? They went to high school, got a high school diploma. They just weren't going to be able to go to college. So she created this like a training program for them. They were doing internships. They were taking classes on the University of Tennessee campus. It was awesome. What she also offered was individual career counseling for these students. And she wanted to use the Holland's Interest Inventory, but she needed to heavily revise it to do so. This included revising how it was administered, changing the jobs so that they were appropriate for the individuals it was designed for. Nobody was going to be an engineer, and so she had to take those types of jobs out, and so on. It also, because this is, again, this assessment is heavily researched, she also had to make sure it was reliable and validated, and so on. So you can totally use traditional theories with diverse populations. You just need to have an awareness of how you might need to adjust them to best serve the population you're working with, or to see if you can hunt down someone who's already done the work for you. The Busaka and Rifus text talks more specifically about culture and the role it plays in careers. First, let's define culture. Arthur and Collins and Sue defined cultural diversity as including race and ethnicity, but also encompassing gender, sexual orientation, disability, age, socioeconomic class, and other marginalized groups with their intersectional identities. Take a moment to note the term intersectional. That's a big one these days. But what exactly does it mean? It refers to people who fit into multiple categories, like a Hispanic woman or a gay black man. Oftentimes, these individuals who are intersectional face more difficulties than those who do not. For example, let's look at the gender pay gap. White women make 80 cents to a man's dollar. Right? That sucks. However, Latina and Hispanic women make 54 cents to a white man. That's a significant drop. We're talking half, okay? And so intersectionality is important, particularly when we're considering these career trends and issues. You don't just want to focus on one aspect of someone's culture. You want to focus on all of the aspects of their culture and how those different backgrounds interact and intersect. Next, we need to acknowledge that every client has a unique cultural background, and that background has some level of importance to the client. It may mean a whole lot, it may mean nothing at all. Also, an individual's experience is not tied to a single cultural identity that is bounded by group membership. For example, we were using, and I'll show you this interview in a minute, the culture and career interview. That old professor was the same one I was talking about before. And what we did was we intentionally chose a diverse group of people, and we used the same interview protocol with each person. And what we were looking for is just the impact of culture on career, right? And she did an interview with a man who was a hairdresser, and he's a gay man. He is currently working as a hairdresser, but his background is in dance. So these are very stereotypical career choices for a gay man, right? However, when we did this interview with him, when she did the interview with him, he didn't talk about his sexual orientation, not much at all, except in the question where she specifically asked about it. And so while for me, coming from my perspective, I would say that his sexual orientation played a large part in his careers, right? For him, it didn't, at least not in talking to us. Maybe it did at the time, but, he's a little bit older now, and so looking back on his life and his career, it wasn't a salient factor, okay? So while it is important to acknowledge the role of culture, we have to also understand what it means to the person in front of us, so we want to be very careful about making assumptions. Career counseling is tricky at times because as career counselors, we need to be knowledgeable about careers and issues that impact careers. So while it is important to know about things such as the gender pay gap, You should also make sure you were looking to the person to find out who they are, where they are, and what culture means to them. What we can do as counselors is to encourage clients' active agency or self-helpfulness. We can do that by helping to educate our clients about the world of work and about career development. I want to emphasize that it's important to do career counseling in an ethical and realistic way. I feel strongly that we need to be relying primarily on postmodern career theories to do this. At the individual level, the influence of culture on a client's career development depends on the meaning the individual ascribes to these influences. Over time, individuals build belief systems that help them understand themselves in the world. Counselors can help in this discovery by attending to the unique and personal accounts of clients' lives. Again, we can understand this through the postmodern theories. If you are using a traditional theory, you have to be more intentional about bringing in culture to understand the client in front of you. This can be challenging for some, especially if you're just starting off in the field. My recommendation to do effective career counseling is to follow a model mostly used in mental health counseling. This model gives space to rapport building, which allows you time to get to know your client. By focusing on the relationship first, you're going to be able to best understand your client's needs and issues and worldview before you move into an assessment or intervention. A lot of times with career counseling, I think we jump right to an assessment. And the field is assessment heavy, so that in some ways that's understandable, but we need to make sure that we're taking time to first talk to the person in front of us. Okay, so the first step of the process is to build rapport or a relationship. So get to know the person in front of you, and you can do this through qualitative assessments. You can do this through interviews, like I'll show you that, a structured interview. You can do this with a kind of a semi-structured intake interview. So there's different ways to build the relationship or rapport and still get information from your client. But by taking the time to build rapport, we can best identify the problem or issue that our client faces. Sometimes the issue isn't one of career choice or career decision making. Okay? And so by jumping straight into a traditional career assessment and assuming that the issue is one of career choice, we're doing a disservice to our client. Okay? We're making an assumption and we're treating a problem that doesn't exist. It's not a huge deal in career counseling, right? Because we're not doing mental health counseling. But it's still a big deal because we're not being ethical. We're not doing what we're asked to do. We're not going to the client to figure out what their goal or issue is first. We're making an assumption. Then you want to choose your assessment or intervention based on the problem or issue that the client has identified. And sometimes they're going to come in with a problem that they've identified, but it's not really what the problem is. So, for example, I had one student who she came in and she took the interest inventory. So where I worked, when I have done career counseling, the process was for students. This was at a career counseling center at a college. The process was for students to take a career assessment before they had met with us. So they took the assessment, we got the results, and then they would come in for an interpretation of the results with us. So she did that. So she came in. I'm going through the results with her. Her results were to be youth pastor. She's going to work with do youth ministry. So I'm telling her results, and she starts crying on me, and I'm like, why are you crying? Why are you so upset? And I said, is this not what you want to do? And she said, no, this is exactly what I want to do. And she goes on to tell me about her experience with ministry and how she's already been doing some work. And I'm like, okay, so why are you upset? Well, she was upset because she was afraid that her parents wanted her to do something else. She was afraid her parents wanted her to do something more practical, like business. And so she did think her issue was one of career choice, but it wasn't. She knew exactly what she wanted to do. Her issue was in the social side of this, right? So those aspects that we don't necessarily think of when we use traditional career assessments. Her issue was in talking to her parents about it. And it turned out that her parents were super supportive of her. It was just her pressure on herself to please them that was the issue. So it wasn't even an issue of her parents not wanting her to do something. It was an issue of her assuming her parents were going to be upset with her. Okay. Again, right? Social support is complex. You guys all have relationships. You know how complex they are. How can we assume that they're not going to be when it comes to making major life decisions? All right. So when working with this client, because of how we had things set up, we really jumped the gun with the intervention. She didn't necessarily need to take the assessment. She really just needed to sit down and talk to someone. Okay. It didn't hurt things, and it maybe brought things to the forefront a little bit quicker than if we had just been talking, but it was still unnecessary. So we want to make sure that we are doing these first two things first: building rapport, identifying the problem or issue, and then determining what kind of assessment or intervention we're going to use. And then the next step is to make some plans. All right, what are our goals? What are we going to do next? And then is the action stage. Sometimes this takes place in a session. Sometimes it takes place out of a session, especially with career counseling. A lot of times when I'm first starting to meet with someone, I'll ask them what their intentions are for career counseling, because a lot of times it can be like a one-shot deal for people, right? All right, I want to come in and get some information and get out of here. Other times you're going to have clients who are fine with coming in once a week. And that's usually I present them with those two options. Right off the bat. Sorry, I think I accidentally hit pause, and I freaked out for a minute because I thought I deleted everything on my recording. Technical issues. Anyway, a lot of times, again, I will present clients with those two options, and then if they want to do the action stuff in the session with me, if they want to sit down with me and do research or talk about internships or job shadowing, then I am more than happy to do that. If they don't think they need me, then I'll just load them up with information and send them on their way. So I really put it to the person to make that decision. And then you want to make sure you're following up with your clients in some way. A lot of times this is one that gets kind of forgotten about, especially when you're doing kind of those one-shot deals, but it is important to check back in with your clients to make sure that they remember you're there and that you are wanting to know how they're doing. I do also have some things for you to remember as you strive to incorporate culture into the career counseling process. First of all, infusing culture in career counseling goes beyond an understanding of different populations. And this is true for all counseling. So when we first started talking about diversity in career counseling, it was about knowing about different cultures, which was super overwhelming because there's so many different cultures out there, right? How can you be knowledgeable about everyone? Now it's more about understanding yourself and your own biases and understanding different cultures, but also understanding how you can do multicultural career counseling without having to know every little thing about every different culture, right? So you can do multicultural career counseling by using like that process I just talked about, by using certain interventions that are culturally appropriate. You can do cultural career counseling without knowing everything about every culture. And then that leaves you space to go to the person in front of you and understand what their culture means to them. Okay, so we're not ignoring culture. We're just saying you don't have to be an expert in every culture to effectively work with all people. You also want to make sure you're being aware of the importance of language. And if you've listened to those, particularly those two episodes on constructionist career counseling and social constructionism, you know how important language can be. And how your own culture impacts your word choice, which impacts your client's understanding and knowledge. You also want to be aware of you as a person in a position of power and how that impacts your work with your client. As a career counselor, you are entering the relationship in a position of power. So you're already starting off as someone who has a certain role in the office, and so you want to make sure that you are working within that power dynamic and trying to even out the playing field, so to speak, trying to remove some of that power dynamic so that you can really get to know your client and consider them as the expert in their own life. You also want to make sure that you are understanding the role of culture and context in the career theories and assessments you choose and how you might adjust them to best work for the person in front of you. So I already mentioned traditional theories and how culture plays a role, and in just a second I'm going to talk more about assessments. It is always the counselor's responsibility to ensure that your client understands that this is a safe and appropriate place to discuss culture. Remember the power dynamic? That means it's on you to make sure that your client is okay with you. Sometimes it's sensitive or just plain difficult to talk about culture, especially if it's something you're not comfortable with or if it's something that you're just starting off doing, okay, if it's new to you. If you're coming from a place where you haven't been around a whole lot of people who are too different from you, and you start counseling people who are different from you, it can be really challenging to have those conversations about culture. We still need to do it though, because it is the counselor's responsibility to initiate those conversations, because this is your counseling room and you are the one in power. So you have to be the one to initiate those. How you do that conversation can vary based on your experience and comfort level. So if it's not something you're super comfortable with starting off right off the bat, then use your tools. Use your culture and career interview. That's semi-structured interview. You can go through like safe zone training to train you how to make sure that you're having a safe space for LGBTQ populations, and you get a sticker. And you can put that sticker in your office, and that indicates that you're a safe place, okay? And so that can be a way to indicate that you are a safe place to talk without having to initiate a conversation on that level. And so there's different ways to do it, as long as you're aware of what you're comfortable with and how you can approach the issue. I also want to spend some time, like I said, talking specifically about assessments. We will have an entire episode about career assessments because they are just that important to the field. However, now I want to note some things specific to culture. And this is just me talking from my experience in research. I'm not going to cite things here. And just also, I'll mention this now. If you're listening to this as the podcast, I haven't been referencing anything, even though a lot of the information I do have referenced on my PowerPoint. So if you're interested in where I'm getting my information from, you can refer to the PowerPoint for those citations and references. This, however, again, is a lot of it is based on research, but it's been so long since I've read it, I don't remember where I got it from. Okay, so this is, for the most part, just me talking. First, I want to look at quantitative assessments. Keep in mind that many people have prior experiences with assessments, sometimes bad experiences. And I'm talking about even career assessments. Sometimes people have bad experiences with career assessments. I teach this career planning class online. I think I mentioned it. And I had one student who, I give them the option. They don't always have to take the like an interest inventory, but if they're really undecided, I encourage them to. And so I had one guy who was really undecided. So they do a blog, and so I communicate with them through the blog. And I suggested that he take the interest inventory, and he did. And in his blog about the interest inventory, he was clearly frustrated. It was something along the lines of, they tell you to take career assessments, and then you take one, and you're taking all these assessments, and it tells me that I want to be this, 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 and this. And I can tell you that I do not want to be this, I do not want to be this, and I do not want to be this. And you get the gist of it. But he was frustrated enough that his frustration was evident through a blog. Okay. So people do have some experiences with assessments. Make sure you address this as you prepare the person to take an assessment and in your interpretation of the assessment. Make sure that you are familiar with issues related to cultural issues with the creation of assessments. Okay, so you can refer to the Busaka and Rifus chapter to consider that. You want to make sure that if you're using a specific assessment, you've done a little bit of legwork to make sure that it's appropriate with all cultures. Like I mentioned with my professor, you may need to revise it or find a revision of the assessment. People may react to the assessment results because of cultural experiences, stereotypes, and more. Consider this as you interpret the results, and you can do this by always going back to the client, okay? Making sure you're using observation skills, watching for body language, reactions, facial reactions, understanding that some cultures may just take the results and not give you a reaction because of your place in a position of power. So really try to do your best as you interpret results of quantitative assessments to go back to the person. And again, just make sure you're considering culture and purpose as you choose assessments, and choose assessments intentionally without just kind of blanket giving people assessments. Qualitative assessments, I like them. They're my favorite. They're my go-to. But they are more time consuming. They need to be practiced by you before you administer them. So you don't just want to be like, hey, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try to do a timeline with this person without practicing it, or at least trying to do it yourself. These assessments do not always result in clear-cut results. Okay? This can be hard when your client wants an answer. When your client's coming in and saying, I want help making a decision, and you do a qualitative assessment, they can be frustrated with that. And so you really need to make sure that you are comfortable with your career counseling skills and with your counseling skills in general a lot of times in order to best work with those types of clients. Qualitative assessments still need to be chosen intentionally and interpreted appropriately, even though most of them tend to be more culturally appropriate just because of the nature of them, because they're very open-ended a lot of times. You still want to be intentional with your interpretations. You can always go back to your client. They often can achieve multiple things at once, so they can, so referring to that process, a lot of times if you use a qualitative assessment, it's going to allow you to build rapport while also assessing your client, while also giving you space to do some education. And again, they tend to naturally consider culture because you're depending on the individual to lead and create the assessment versus you in the role of the person who owns the knowledge. Finally, I want to introduce you to the culture and career interview that I had mentioned a couple of times. This interview is a semi-structured career interview that provides a framework for helping our clients talk about the role that culture has had on the career development. This interview was developed to be used as an intake interview, which means you would use it the first time you're meeting with someone, kind of like Savickas' career story interview. And the authors developed it to be used in conjunction with SCCT. So that's cool that they're being intentional about using it with a framework, right? Personally, I think you could use this with a variety of theories, though. I like it because it gives people a framework for talking about culture. So again, if you're not super comfortable having conversations about culture just yet, this is a great place to start. It uses open-ended questions, so it's qualitative. But it's also open enough, even though it's a semi-structured interview, it's open enough that you could add in questions, ask your client to talk more about certain things, and so on. So my final thoughts on everything, not just this last interview. Culture plays a complex role in career development. It helps create who we are, what we know, and how we make decisions. We have to acknowledge the role it plays both with ourselves and our clients. With ourselves, we have to understand this role because it does impact the things we say and how we approach counseling. Remember my miracle question? That if you could be anything in the world, what would you be? That was an assumption, right? That was my culture impacting my counseling. So by first understanding ourselves, we can then best help our clients make connections between their culture and their own development.